Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever been scrolling through social media and just wondered why expressing outrage seems to be, well, the absolute fastest way to gain a following these days? Today, we're going to objectively unpack a massive and highly debated sociological shift happening right now in our modern world. We're talking about the transition toward a culture where claiming victimhood can literally equate to gaining moral status. It's a complex, totally fascinating topic that touches on sociology, psychology, and modern politics. And my goal today is to give you a really clear, structured framework to understand exactly what's happening out there. We'll be drawing from leading sociologists and researchers to kind of cut through all the noise.
Okay, let's dive into this. We'll be working through a completely neutral roadmap today. First, we'll trace the three eras of moral culture throughout history. Then, we'll define what modern victimhood culture actually is, explore the politics of pain, examine how this tactic is weaponized across the entire political spectrum, and finally, we'll look at its overarching impact on democracy itself.
Section 1. Three Eras of Moral Culture, Tracing the Sociological Shift.
To really understand where we are today, we first need to look at how we got here, right? Using this widely cited framework developed by sociologists Bradley Campbell and Jason Manning, we can see that Western civilization has essentially moved through three distinct phases. First up, we had the honor culture of the 19th century and earlier. Think of Old West duels. If someone insulted your hat, you literally had to physically fight them to maintain your reputation, which honestly sounds exhausting. Then the 20th century brought us dignity culture. This is the classic era of sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. The idea was that dignity is inherent, it just can't be taken away by a mere insult. You were encouraged to have thick skin, and if a serious conflict did arise, you went to the legal system. Now, in the 21st century, fueled heavily by social media, researchers argue we are entering victimhood culture.
And this framework brilliantly illustrates how victimhood culture acts as a sort of hybrid. Notice how it takes the extremely high sensitivity to slight that we saw in honor culture, where every minor insult is treated as a major offense, but it completely discards the direct, physical retaliation. Instead, it borrows the dignity culture's method of relying on third parties to handle grievances. But rather than quietly using the legal system, it relies on appealing to administrative authorities or the public sphere, usually by putting people on blast on social media. And the source of moral worth, that shifts entirely. It's no longer about a reputation for bravery or even inherent self-worth, but about your status as the aggrieved party.
Section 2. Defining victimhood culture. The architecture of grievance.
Let's look at what this modern cultural phase actually looks like on the ground today. According to the sociological research, victimhood culture is a framework where highlighting your victimization actually grants you external support and a higher moral status. This is an absolutely crucial shift. Historically, being a victim was, well, viewed as a low-status position. But in this new culture, victimhood becomes a sought-after moral currency. Why? Because it brings tangible advantages, things like support, protection, or the ability to silence critics. Meaning, the culture actively incentivizes people to publicly air their grievances. The idea spreads like wildfire.
A key pillar of this new culture is a concept of the microaggression. Now, unlike legal standards in a dignity culture, which rely heavily on objective measures and intent, a microaggression can be entirely unintentional. The offense is assessed primarily by the subjective feelings of the person allegedly slighted. As researchers point out, this shifts the whole conflict resolution process away from due process and legal standards straight into the realm of subjective emotion. And that can sometimes lead to immediate social ostracism for the accused, completely bypassing any formal trial.
So, you might be wondering, where does this culture actually thrive? Well, Campbell and Manning identified the ideal conditions, and they might surprise you a bit. Victimhood culture doesn't primarily pop up in highly oppressive societies. Actually, scratch that, it arises in environments with low social stratification, meaning high equality combined with high cultural diversity and the presence of administrative authorities acting as referees. When you put all that together, it perfectly describes modern university campuses. In these highly egalitarian environments, the smallest offenses are perceived as major attempts to disrupt the equality, triggering the highest levels of outrage and immediate appeals to the administration.
Section 3. The politics of pain, vulnerability versus tactical victimhood.
Now, what's really interesting here is how researcher Lily Shaliaraki draws a really sharp contrast between two concepts we often confuse, vulnerability and victimhood.
Vulnerability is a lived reality. It's a systematic condition of exposure to harm due to real historical and structural circumstances, like deep generational poverty. Victimhood, on the other hand, is a communicative act. It's a tactical act of speech, a calculated political claim to pain used specifically to seek recognition and gain power in the public sphere. So basically, one is a state of being, the other is a political tool.
I want you to keep this in your mental toolkit. The next time you see claims of victimhood totally dominating your newsfeed, just stop and ask yourself, who is silenced in this conversation? Because often, the truly vulnerable, the people facing severe, systemic hardships, they completely lack the internet access, the platform, the social capital, or the algorithmic priming to be heard at all. Meanwhile, powerful actors step in and use the tactical language of victimhood to dominate the discourse.
Section 4. Weaponization across the spectrum, a nonpartisan tactic. It's really critical to understand that this sociological phenomenon isn't just confined to one side of the aisle. No way. It has been enthusiastically adopted by actors across the entire political landscape. On the political left, sociologist Jarima Pikatuski observes that victimhood is often used as a mechanism for social control. Critics argue that instead of seeking legal justice for alleged discrimination, the tactic here is to socially ostracize the accused. It essentially substitutes the careful, rigorous due process of the legal system with reputation-destroying public exclusion, often based on those highly subjective microaggressions we discussed earlier.
But balancing the spectrum, Lily Chiliariki notes a massive adoption of this exact same framework on the political right, through what she calls the reversal of victimhood. Here, powerful right-wing populists and leaders, she uses massive global figures like Donald Trump or Vladimir Putin as examples, will repeatedly cast themselves or their nations as the ultimate victims of the system, the media, or global elites. By adopting the rhetoric of the victimized, they legitimize their agendas, they rally voters, and they promote themselves as charismatic saviors fighting back against an oppressive force.
Okay, so let's move on and see how this builds into actual institutional strategy. Researcher David Green from Civitas outlines specific, highly calculated tactics that groups use to lock in this preferential treatment and maintain their victim status. They'll highlight historic grievances experienced by their ancestors, they purposely increase their touchiness, constantly redefining previously innocent remarks as deep insults, they'll widen the definition of their group to boost their political numbers, and, perhaps most effectively of all, they put their claims beyond rational contradiction. Basically, arguing that if you aren't part of the group, you simply lack the capacity to even understand or question their claims.
Section 5. The impact on democracy, the cost of competitive victimhood. Sociologists are seriously warning us that living in a constant state of mutual aversion, cyberbullying, and competitive grievance, well, it can lead directly to dangerous social disorder. Emil Durkheim, one of the founding fathers of sociology, defined this as anomie. It's a state of profound societal decay. In anomie, society faces lasting instability, where people just break down psychologically, trust totally evaporates, and citizens continuously fight among themselves. Ultimately, this renders the entire state weak from the inside out.
Building on this, David Green argues that this dynamic leads straight to the balkanization of society. Think about it. For centuries, the liberal democratic ideal has been equality under the law, judging the individual by their own character and actions, not their inherited group identity. But rule by victims reverses this progress. It replaces impartial justice with a rigid hierarchy of grievances, where your moral worth, your employability, and your legal standing are dictated by your assigned rank on the victimhood ladder. It fundamentally diminishes personal responsibility.
So what does this all mean for us? We're standing at a major sociological crossroads, facing what might be the defining question of our era. Can our society find the strength, the resilience, and the thick skin required to return to a culture of dignity and impartial justice? Or are we now permanently entrenched in the chaotic, fragmented politics of competitive victimhood? I really want you to think deeply about how this dynamic plays out in your own feeds and communities. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep analyzing, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.